Good day. My name is Kevin Kamps. I serve as Radioactive Waste Specialist at Beyond Nuclear, based in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And I also serve on the board of directors of Don't Waste Michigan, representing the Kalamazoo chapter. And I'm happy to join you today to give a brief update on consolidated interim storage facilities. I've had the honor and privilege of taking part in similar congressional briefings going back to 2018. So what are consolidated interim storage facilities? They are a ad hoc plan B because the Yucca Mountain project for a national dump site was widely opposed and was wisely abandoned by the Obama administration in 2010. So unfortunately, this plan B has brought to the surface some very risky proposals. They include the so-called private consolidated interim storage facilities in Texas and New Mexico, which I'll mostly focus on, but also more recently proposed federal consolidated interim storage facilities. So these so-called private consolidated interim storage facilities include interim storage partners at Waste Control Specialists in Texas, as well as Holtec International and Eddie Lee Energy Alliance in southeastern New Mexico. Both of these schemes in Texas and New Mexico are not consent-based, and they violate environmental justice. And for that reason, we believe the Department of Energy has resurrected a program from the 1980s called consent-based siting for federal consolidated interim storage facilities. And we are waiting for the Department of Energy at any time now to announce its first round of awardees for federal grants, $2 million federal grants per awardee for communities to consider someday hosting federal consolidated interim storage facilities. And another category of grant recipient will be booster groups to help sell this idea to potential host communities and to the wider society. We have tremendous concerns about consolidated interim storage facilities. One of the most important, especially in light of the East Palestine, Ohio train wreck of February 2023, is the very high-level transportation risks associated with moving high-level radioactive waste through most states in the lower 48 to reach these targeted Western dump sites. Risks include severe accidents or terrorist attacks, but also during so-called routine shipments, there is still neutron and gamma radiation emitted by these containers. So persons nearby will be receiving a dose of radiation. And as the National Academy of Sciences has reported for decades, any exposure to ionizing radioactivity is hazardous, is a health risk, and these risks accumulate over a lifetime of exposures. So what are some of the forms of resistance to these plans to ship waste willy-nilly across our country? Because if these facilities are in fact temporary or interim, that means that transportation risks will automatically be doubled for no good reason. Because someday these wastes will have to go to a permanent repository. And Yucca Mountain, Nevada, on Western Shoshone Indian land is off the table. And in fact, the Department of Energy has said a repository cannot be opened before the year 2048 in this country. So the most significant form of opposition, which clearly shows that these schemes in Texas and New Mexico are not consent-based, are state laws. The state of Texas passed a prohibition on storage or disposal of high-level radioactive waste in that state from reactors in other states shipping there. And that law was passed in September of 2021 before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission licensed that facility for construction and operation. More recently, on St. Patrick's Day 2023, the state of New Mexico followed suit with a similar law, stating that unless the state gives explicit consent that high-level radioactive waste cannot be stored nor disposed of in the state of New Mexico, which has no atomic reactors within its border. So those state laws are a clear sign that there is no consent for these facilities in those places. In addition to that, there are federal appeals before multiple circuit courts across the country These include challenges to the licensing by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on the basis of violations of multiple federal laws, including the Nuclear Waste Policy Act as amended, the Administrative Procedure Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act. On the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, the focus of the violation is the fact that the Department of Energy cannot take title to commercial spent nuclear fuel at an interim site in the absence of an operating licensed permanent repository. And as I just mentioned, the Department of Energy has said the earliest that a repository could open in this country is the year 2048. But the reason for that precaution in federal law that goes all the way back to 1982 is a safeguard against a small state, a state of small population like New Mexico, for example, being targeted for interim storage in the absence of a permanent repository. And then because of that absence, getting stuck with a de facto surface permanent storage facility for highly radioactive waste. And so the federal appeals have been decided on the Texas case in the DC Circuit against opposition, but we are still waiting to hear a ruling from the Fifth Circuit where the state of Texas and Fasken Land and Minerals and Permian Basin land and royalty owners, which are mining and ranching interests, still have a federal appeal pending. That is on the Texas dump. On the New Mexico dump, now that the NRC has approved it on May 9th of 2023, those federal appeals are ripe for judicial consideration as well. So we expect in the near future for those proceedings to resume, and those will take place in the DC Circuit, the Fifth Circuit, New Orleans, and the 10th Circuit, Denver. So in the last part here, I would like to speak about congressional issues surrounding consolidated interim storage facilities. For more than a decade, there have been proposals to authorize consolidated interim storage facilities via appropriations committees in Congress. This has met resistance from congressional authorizers against this intrusion on their jurisdiction. But also, as I mentioned, targeted states are wanting to keep the precaution in the law that requires a repository to be open before interim storage can open. So those efforts have been fended off for over a decade, year after year, but we have to continue to fend them off year after year. Another aspect of congressional action is funding for consolidated interim storage facilities to the tune of, several years ago, $25 million per year, more recently, $50 million per year. This is the money that would be used to award applicants to consider becoming federal consolidated interim storage facilities. We have tremendous concerns about this because in the past, in the 1980s and 1990s, the Department of Energy targeted primarily Native American reservations. And this raises serious red flags about environmental injustice, tempting communities in need with large amounts of money for them to consider hosting forever deadly high-level radioactive waste. And so the environmental justice movement in this country can be expected to protest loudly if low-income people of color communities, other Black, Indigenous people of color communities, including Latinx communities in the Southwest, are targeted for these facilities. And in conclusion, I will just hold up the solutions to these dilemmas. And that would be to stop producing high-level radioactive waste in this country, whether proposed new build reactors or the old reactors that are dangerously age degraded in this country. We need to stop making nuclear waste for which we have no good solutions. And if Congress insists and the administration insists on subsidizing radioactive waste management in this country, consolidated interim storage is wrong-headed. And actually, for the waste that exists in this country, we need to implement and require hardened on-site storage at the nuclear power plants, whether closed or still operating, where this waste is located, to prevent the catastrophic risks of pool fires, as nearly happened at Fukushima Daiichi in Japan, but as well to address the risks of status quo dry cask storage, which are very problematic in this country at this time. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you, and I appreciate your time.